Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's YouTube channel, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette Sports Now. My name is Stephen Thompson, one of your Pitt beat writers, here with Kyle Rowland from the Toledo Blade. We're here to get you set for the GameAbove Sports Bowl out in Detroit later this Thursday. The Pitt Panthers will be taking on the Toledo Rockets, two teams kind of with similar records. And their seasons went in similar directions, but Pitt trying to salvage their season and get one last win to kind of cap the season strong, with Toledo looking for their second win over a power conference opponent this season. Kyle, let's get right into it. Can you tell us a little bit more about Toledo's season and how they went from winning 4 of their first 5 and then to getting to 7-5?
Yeah, I mean, certainly high expectations entering the season. They won the MAC and a bowl game 2 years ago. They won 11 consecutive games last year, lost in the MAC title game. They were ranked for, 3 or 4 weeks, and had a lot of key pieces back. And then clobber Mississippi State on the road, and it's like, oh man, like this could be the year. And then promptly lose to Western Kentucky, beat Miami pretty badly to open up the MAC season. Everyone's all high again. And then from that point on, it's been up and down, almost win-loss. Regular season ended with quite a thud, similar to Pitt. Got blown out at home by Ohio, and then lost to a pretty bad Akron team to close out the regular season. I mean, the inconsistency, I would say, somewhat stems from injuries. I don't know, maybe at times a lack of confidence. At the end of the day, I think you are what your record says you are. And Toledo, I mean, maybe they're not a 7-5 team, but they're probably like, an 8-4 team. The Mississippi State game, I think, was certainly a glimpse of what Toledo could be. Obviously, they played well that game. They had a great game plan. They schemed it up. They executed. But that was kind of like the ceiling. That wasn't going to be week in, week out. So maybe gave a little false hope. So yeah, I mean, it was just a season that Toledo fans were frustrated by because of what they thought could happen, what had happened the last few years. And then, being in the MAC title race, late into November and getting blown out by Ohio at home, was pretty disheartening, I would say.
Yeah, I mean that injuries, and that certainly sounds like the story of Pitt season. Maybe not being a 7-5 team, but clearly not much better than that. It does seem like from 2023 to 2024, the offense maybe took a bit of a step back, and like you said, that Mississippi State game was a glimpse of what they could be, but didn't seem like that was what the offense was for the rest of the year. What kind of happened there?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing undoubtedly is the offensive line. I mean, Toledo's offensive line is
this is just a mirror of Pitt, huh?
I mean, just it's not great even when they're all healthy, and when they're not all healthy, it's just a massive problem. And they had a lot of injuries on the O-line this year. I mean, they had to replace all 5 starters on the O-line. None of the 5 starters had started an FBS game in their career entering the season. So that was obviously an uphill climb. Dave Briggs and I, my colleague at the Blade, we probably gave them too much credit entering the season, thinking that they would get it fixed just because the line had been really solid the last couple of years. But it's tough when you're inexperienced at that position. That has led to the run game not being good. Part of the problem is the running backs just aren't near as good as Penny Boone was last year, who had 1,400 rushing yards. And I mean, it's hard when you have no run game. I mean, like, you have to be able to run the ball at times, especially in the Midwest, late in the season when the weather isn't as great. But Tucker Gleason, the quarterback, I mean, I don't really think he's been a problem. I mean, at times he gets criticized, but I mean, he's plenty good enough to win games, to lead Toledo to a MAC championship, all that kind of stuff. Juwan Newton is an excellent wide receiver. Junior Vandeross also, really solid. They have a good tight end, Anthony Torres, who's gotten some kind of NFL feelers, especially entering this season. So, I mean, I think they have plenty of pieces. It just kind of all stems from that offensive line. I mean, it's cliche and all that stuff, but we've seen it for 100 years. Like, games truly are won and lost in the trenches. And if you're ineffective at the O-line, you're going to struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you don't need to tell any Pitt fans that they certainly understand those struggles. You mentioned those outstanding receivers that they have, the really good tight end. The passing game has been a bright spot at times. But who are some of the other stars on this team, especially on the defensive side, that we should look out for?
Yeah, I mean, a guy who really kind of took off this year was Avery Smith, a cornerback. Obviously, Toledo, last year had Quinyon Mitchell, who was great at Toledo and now has been, one of the top rookies in the NFL. And it was like, man, how are they going to replace him? And on top of that, R.J. Delancey transferred to Nebraska or to Wisconsin. Another one of their starting corners graduated. So it was like a massive hole in the defensive secondary. But Avery Smith has stepped up. He's one of the leaders in the country in passes defended and pass breakups, and seems like he's going to be like the next, great Toledo cornerback. They've really had a lot of guys drafted out of the secondary here these last few years. And safety Maxon Hook, fifth-year senior, kind of the heart and soul of the defense. Will be interesting to see if he plays, though. He's been out of some practices. He's battled injuries. He also is pretty much a surefire draft pick, not a high round guy, fifth, sixth, seventh, kind of a late round guy. So I don't know how much that plays into it. I personally would think this would be a spotlight game for you.
Right.
If you're a late round pick, that maybe you could rise up the board. So if that were the reason, I would play for him. Darius Alexander, a defensive lineman, really effective. Anthony Dunn is a guy who doesn't play a lot of snaps. He's a transfer from Florida A&M, but when he's in there, he's incredibly disruptive with tackles for loss and sacks. And then at linebacker, Dan Bolden is a senior. He's like exactly what you would picture of like a Midwest linebacker, just mullet, big blockhead, just looks like a football player to the core. So those are kind of the guys to keep an eye on. And we've talked to more defensive players, I would say, leading up to the game than offensive. I think they're motivated. I mean, these bowl games, it's so hard now to kind of tell with opt-outs and the portal and the, perception of bowl games being meaningless. I think it's really hard to tell if they're motivated or not. They seem motivated. There's a lot of seniors on this team, so I would think they would want to go out with a win. I think it helps that they're playing Pittsburgh, a power conference team. It's somewhat close to home. That can be a negative too, because you're in Detroit instead of some sunny destination. But I would expect a decent amount of Toledo fans to kind of, juice up the atmosphere. Hopefully Pitt fans come over as well. But to me, it feels like a game where in the first quarter, I think you'll have a good idea of like, hey, is Pitt motivated?
Yeah, who came to play or who didn't.
Yeah, like what's going to happen here?
Yeah. And so you've talked about, the opt-outs. I think Jason Candle, when we spoke to him, earlier in the season, I forget if that just how long ago that was, but he said he wasn't anticipating many opt-outs or kind of absences to injury or anything like that. What's your sense of how many guys are going to actually play? Are there going to be any significant losses that you're expecting Toledo to enter this game with?
Yeah, my sense is they're fairly healthy, and that it's going to be pretty much a full complement of players. And if not, it'll just feel like a regular season game where maybe some guys are out. Like, I don't think there's going to be some mass exodus of Toledo players from this game. I think it matters to them more so than maybe some other programs, just because anytime a G5 team has an opportunity to play a power conference team, it's like meaningful to them and they want to win. And it would only be the second time in school history that Toledo's beaten two power conference teams in the same season. So I think there's a little bit of juice on their side for that. And I don't expect to see, a 2025, roster out there, so to speak.
Yeah. So with that all said, can you give me a game prediction? What do you think is going to happen in this one? How's this game going to go down?
Yeah. I think it's hard to tell. Number one, I think these bowl games, it's so easy to be way off on your prediction. Just, I think motivation is like a huge part. And I think there's evidence that, hey, neither one of these teams might be very motivated. But then on the other side, there is reason for I mean, I think these are two coaches that can get their team up, keep the locker room together, things like that. Obviously, like Eli Holstein playing, that has a significant, impact on the game. But I mean, I think it's going to be close regardless, whoever wins. I mean, I kind of think Toledo will be the more motivated team. I mean, on paper, if these teams played in September, I mean, I think it'd be pretty lopsided toward Pitt. I think it's a little different in this scenario in a bowl game in Detroit. I mean, both teams are limping in. Pitt especially. I mean, losing 5 straight just got to be really difficult on your kind of psyche. And now you're like going to Detroit to play Toledo. It's like, but I don't know. I tend to think Toledo close, 30-27, 27-25, something like that. But if Holstein plays like really well, I mean, I think a big Pitt win is on the table, no doubt.
You're a little bit more optimistic in terms of the scoring than I am. I think in my game preview, I said maybe 20-17 Toledo, maybe close, but not necessarily good, if you know what I mean. But thanks so much for coming on, Kyle. Can you tell everyone where they can read your stuff and follow you on social media or anything like that?
Yeah, you can just ToledoBlade.com, where all the stories are at. And then on Twitter, at Kyle Rowland. It's just my name, KYLEROWLAND.
Thank you so much for coming on, Kyle. Appreciate you breaking down this game with me. And we will see, both of us, me and Kyle, will see you guys from Ford Field on Thursday afternoon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.